Senator Tom Cotton. He's got a brand new book out, by the way, next month entitled 7 Things You Can't Say About China. And Senator, we'll see if we get to any of those 7 in this conversation. We're definitely going to talk about China. But I want to ask you about the reporting there that Lucas had about the firing of these inspectors general. I've heard of from some of your GOP colleagues who are concerned about this, saying it didn't give the proper notification, even if ultimately it would be. The notice wasn't there, and is President Trump signaling he's just going to, observe which laws he wants to and not others?
Well, Shannon, time and time again, the Supreme Court has said that Congress can't impose restrictions on the president's power to remove officers. In President Trump's first term, he removed the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, despite limitations on the president's constitutional power to remove officers. That was litigated up the Supreme Court, and the president won. So ultimately, these inspectors general serve at the pleasure of the president. He wants new people in there. He wants people who focused on getting out waste and fraud and abuse and reforming these agencies. He has a right to get in there who he wants.
Do you think he will? That's the next question, because there have been times when those inspector general slots have been left open by various presidents. Are you confident, because they're your eyes and ears as lawmakers, that they will be filled?
I believe so, and he says he wants to fill those offices. Maybe he won't fill them immediately because there's an entire administration to staff and he may have other priorities. But I think the president's inherent power to remove officers will be upheld if it's challenged in court, as it has been time and again for Democratic and Republican presidents alike.
I want to ask you about the Middle East. 4 more hostages home. You've been critical of this deal. You've had some concerns about it. It came together, seems like an approach from President Biden and President Trump. Are you confident in the deal moving forward, the fact that there is progress? We are getting these people home.
Well, of course, we welcome home these hostages, and you can't help but be overjoyed in your heart to see families welcoming them back. At the same time, my general preference is not to negotiate with terrorists. Hamas was on its back foot. They're not destroyed. They were almost destroyed. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we didn't negotiate with Imperial Japan. We said unconditional surrender and give us our 40,000 Americans back. Now, that said, the deal is underway. We predicted at the time that Hamas might break the terms of the deal, and that's apparently exactly what happened yesterday by not sending home Israeli civilian women. That's one reason why the Israeli government has paused the relocation of Gazans to certain areas inside of Gaza. I would say if Hamas wants to continue this ceasefire, they need to respect every single term of that deal.
Well, we're watching minute by minute as 2 other phases are still yet to be negotiated as well. I want to ask you about these hearings this week. Your Senate Intel Committee that you now chair will hear from Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI nominee. She's got plenty of critics out there from both sides of the aisle. Let me read from a former chairman of the U.S. National Intelligence Council, writing that she's got no background in intelligence whatsoever and has never managed much of anything. Even more worryingly, as someone meant to advise the president and protect our nation's secrets from our adversaries, Gabbard has cozied up to at least 2 vicious dictators who are America's enemies. There are concerns about her positions with Bashar al-Assad, Edward Snowden, her use of, FISA and those tools and how she feels about them. Are you confident that you've had your questions on those issues addressed?
Yeah, I've had many occasions to speak with Ms. Gabbard, as have the members of the committee and other senators. We got her background check back along with her financial papers last week. We promptly scheduled a hearing 7 days later as the rules of our committee allow. And I can promise you and all Americans that Tulsi Gabbard is going to have a full hearing on Thursday. It's going to be just like the hearing that we conducted for John Ratcliffe and the hearings that the committee has conducted for nominees from both the Democratic and Republican presidents alike. No more, no less, no better, no worse. I understand that people have their differences of opinion with Ms. Gabbard. Probably some Republicans disagree with the vote she's cast as a Democratic Congresswoman. A lot of Democrats may be upset that she finally saw the light and left the Democratic Party. I do hope, though, that we won't see anyone questioning her patriotism. Hillary Clinton has basically called her a traitor in the past. This is a woman who served more than 20 years in our nation's army. She's passed 5 different background checks. I reviewed the latest one. It's clean as a whistle. It's fine for people to have policy differences and ask questions about those differences. I hope no one would impugn Ms. Gabbard's patriotism or her integrity.
There are reports in both Axios and National Review quoting GOP senators saying they think she might not even make it out of committee. I mean, are there things about her conversations, her positions with regard to Assad or to Putin that raise any concern for you?
Well, I think there's a lot of people making predictions on background about the president's nominees that don't come true. If you recall, Pete Hegseth in early December was on the verge of withdrawing and being replaced by someone, and now he's Secretary Hegseth at the Department of Defense. They've been making a lot of the similar predictions about Donald Trump over the last few years, and he's now staged the greatest political comeback in American history. So again, we'll have a full and fair hearing for Ms. Gabbard on Thursday. She'll be able to explain her past statements and her votes. She'll explain, I'm sure, also that whatever her views on certain policies, programs, or laws, that she will faithfully execute the president's agenda. And if she's confirmed, she'll give an unbiased and unvarnished look at the intelligence that comes in every day about the nation's threats.
Well, one of those threats you've been long vocal about is China. Let's talk about TikTok, because President Trump seems to be willing to pause the ban on TikTok and to try to work out a deal. There are different conversations and rumors about what may come together, but he's indicated he may be willing to allow some level of Chinese ownership or connection to this. And he gives this explanation to our colleague, Sean Hannity, about why.
But you can say that about everything made in China. Look, we have our telephones made in China for the most part. We have so many things made in China, so why don't they mention that?
Your response?
Well, the law that we passed last year is in effect, and the law is the law, and it imposes ruinous consequences on any company that continues to host or distribute TikTok. Not just, at this point, not just liability, but bankruptcy, because the penalties are so high that most medium-sized countries couldn't pay them. So I want to commend those companies like Apple and Google that are following the law and no longer hosting TikTok. But our point in passing that law was never to ban TikTok in the United States. It was to force ByteDance, its parent company that is controlled by the Chinese communists, to divest from TikTok, to have a TikTok that is not influenced by Chinese communists. It's not just a threat to our privacy and data, although it certainly is that. It's a threat because it spreads propaganda like anti-Semitic content and pro-Hamas content. It exposes children to extreme violence, obscenity, drug use, even encouraging suicide, and it can be used as an actual tool of statecraft, as you saw when Congress passed the law. TikTok sent push notices to its users' phones, urging them to contact Congress and lobby against the law. What might they do if Donald Trump imposes tariffs on China, or in a moment of heightened tension around Taiwan? That's why it's critical that there be a complete and total break with communist China, and that's exactly what the law insists. As for a deal, I'm not really concerned about whether this American company or that American group of investors buys it, or for that matter, if we work with partners in places like Europe or the Middle East or East Asia, if it's controlled by an ally that's very different than it's controlled by communist China.
Okay, I want to try to get to two quick things before you go. While we're on the subject of China, this was a headline from the New York Times yesterday. CIA now favors lab leak theory to explain COVID's origins. This was their headline in February of 2020. Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origins. Do you feel some level of vindication?
Well, I said from the very beginning, COVID probably came from that lab. I didn't have access to classified intelligence or special scientific knowledge. I just used a little common sense and looked at the facts and understood what Chinese communists do. I'm glad that in the final days of the Biden administration, the CIA reached the same conclusion, and I commend John Ratcliffe for making that conclusion public. The important thing now is that we have to make China pay for unleashing this plague on the world, just like we have to make them pay for stealing our jobs and harming American workers and businesses by doing things like imposing tariffs on them on strategically critical goods, or passing my legislation that would repeal their permanent most favored nation status.
All right, very quickly before you go, President Trump has taken back the security detail for a number of people: Anthony Fauci, Mike Pompeo, Brian Hook. Among them, John Bolton, too. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says, pray it won't happen, but what if one of them now gets attacked? If Iran commits violence against any of these men, Mr. Trump won't be able to escape some responsibility.
Yeah, I would encourage the president to revisit the decision for those people who are being targeted by Iran, as the president was targeted for assassination by Iran. As the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I've reviewed the intelligence in the last few days. The threat to anyone involved in President Trump's strike on Qasem Soleimani is persistent. It's real. Iran is committed to vengeance against all of these people. In fact, the chief of staff of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence agreed with me that if these threats were against him or his family, that he would want security, because the threats are real. There are gaps in our coverage. We don't know what we don't know, and it's better to be safe than sorry, because it's not just about these men who helped President Trump carry out his policy in his first term. It's about their family and friends, innocent bystanders every time they're in public. It's also about the president being able to get good people and get good advice. If people are saying going to work for the president now on Iran or China or North Korea or the Mexican drug cartels, they might hesitate to do so, or they might hesitate if they're in office to give him the advice he needs or carry out the policies that he decides upon.
Senator, thank you for your time. We'll be watching Thursday for that hearing.
Thank you.
All right, up next.